Well, welcome back, everybody. We're in week 4 already, and we're going to start talking about barriers and lighting. We won't go into too much on lighting because there's a fairly good explanation in the text, in my opinion. And quite frankly, lighting is a little harder for you to control from a security perspective, only that you may have input as to what needs to be lit well for security purposes. But in a new build especially, lighting is generally something that is more put up for ambiance in some cases than it is for security. And the types of lighting is often specified long before you get a chance to look at a building drawing. So we'll talk about lighting and how you can make retrofits, but barriers are certainly something that you can have input in. So let's start on that. But before we go there, let's just talk a little bit about our policies from last week and a couple of learnings. So first, I hope you found that using a set format made things easier. Writing that silly policy, if you will, that we did first kind of sets the stage and gets your mind right for this is all built in sections. And that's exactly what you did with your security policy. Now, for some of you, especially those who put in stuff early in the week, I picked on you quite a bit and asked some really tough questions. But these are the types of questions that employees will ask. So in the past, I actually had like 30 different security practitioners that I knew across industry be the judges on policies. And in the wake of COVID, that's kind of hard to do. But they would go in and act like an employee and think up the types of questions employees would ask. And so some of those silly questions about, excuse me, the beep beep policy, and what if I'm deaf? What if I'm unable to talk? What if I have laryngitis, right? I can't make the noise. Am I going to go to, to the president's office and be disciplined? Those are the types of questions you'll get. So don't forget that catch-all policy. In your policy, that catch-all statement, if you remember correctly, we said, and the security department has the authority, if you will, to make determinations, right? As to what may or may not be covered in the policy. It's kind of a catch-all. You have to give some examples, you have to give some specifics, but then put that catch-all in there for those really oddball things that happen that don't tie your hands. The one thing I did see was discipline seemed a little bit, tough in some of these. You can't fire anybody. You're not empowered to fire people. That's done by management, right? Managers, lawyers, company lawyers do the firing. HR does the firing. There are people who are tasked with terminations. It's not the security person. You can only suspend somebody if necessary in most cases, and you need to check on that when you get that first job to see where your powers are. And you can make recommendations as to whether the person is suitable to come back from a security perspective from in your swim lane, but you can't fire. So make sure your disciplinary policy is realistic. I always like to say, violations of this policy will be addressed through the progressive discipline procedure. If your company has one, they already say first offense of something is, right up. Second one is a final warning. Third one is up to and including termination. A lot of companies say that in their handbooks. You've probably all seen it if you've worked any kind of job before. If you got one, then just reference that and let that be the disciplinary, if you will. Policies are cheap and effective ways to guide behavior. Okay. It also tells people what to watch for. We add the T there. Perfect. If you can guide behavior through a policy, if you can say everyone must enter through the main entrance, there are no other entrances to the building allowed, then you may not have to have a guard at those other entrances, right? Depending on what you're protecting, right? If people obey that, then anybody who doesn't obey it is a bad guy, right? So guiding behaviors through policy help you keep the honest people honest and identify those honest people. And it also tells those honest people what to watch out for, because they will report things that are violations of policy. So policies are cheap and effective. Just remember that. They're cheap and effective because they are the first thing you ought to consider whenever you have to fix something from a physical security standpoint. Think whether or not you can do it with policy, because you can do it right away, you can do it quickly, and you don't have to spend a dime on it. So one of the things that when we talk about barriers especially is we have to define our perimeter. So your doors and your locks, they secure what's commonly referred to as the skin of a building, right? The outside walls, the outside of the outside walls of a building. When you can walk up and touch the building from outside, you're touching the skin of the building is what it's referred to, right? But your perimeter may be miles away if you own a lot of land, buffer area, if you will, on your piece of property for your factory or your office building or whatever you are protecting. You need to define the perimeter, however, in terms of a security perimeter. And by that, I mean that you don't have to protect. If you have a single building that sits on 80 acres of land, the building footprint, right, the size of the building only sits on a half an acre, right? And those other 80 acres just open field. Do you have to protect the whole 80 acres? The answer is no. You can set the perimeter in a little farther. You'll have your legal perimeter, your real estate line, and then your security perimeter, which is in farther, right? And in some cases, you're just ceding that land to other activity. If somebody walks across that, if you decide to bring your 80-acre perimeter in and you're only going to protect the 5 square acres around your building, from a security perspective, if somebody walks across that other part and you catch them there, you could advise them. You may have it marked as with signage as private property, but you're not going to consider that to be a security incident. So you'll define your perimeter as to where your barriers start, right? Either through policy, like signage, or fencing, or whatever other barriers you have. You kind of define that. It doesn't have to be your entire piece of property. And that's something I see security managers sometimes say, well, I own all this land, so therefore I must protect all this land. Sometimes you can just cede some of it. Just say, you know what, as long as it's not, totally illegal, I really don't care too much what goes on there because it doesn't affect my focus on my resource, which is the building. Now, outside the skin of that building, you have grounds, right? And you're going to determine where the perimeter is in those grounds. You also have parking areas normally. You have common areas. Could be a picnic area, could be a park. I've had facilities with common area that included an airport, a private airport. And there could be other buffers. But when a real buffer area exists, you can really enhance that deter, delay, and detect element with your depth and defense because, again, if say you have the 80 acres, you've decided you're going to protect that 5. The difference between the 80 and the 5, you could monitor. You're not going to consider it to be a big security incident. You're not even going to respond to it, but you'll know when people are moving there. It gives you that extra buffer and that extra time to react. But lighting and physical barriers are what you're going to use to set up that perimeter. And they're pretty economical for the most part. They're more expensive than policies. But as far as just regular barriers, they're pretty economical when compared to other physical security systems, things like cameras and card readers to get into a building, an access control system, and an intrusion detection system. Lights and physical barriers can be economical. Yet before we get right into talking about barriers themselves and what you might use for a barrier, there's a really important concept that you need to learn in physical security called task and purpose. Anything you put in place to increase the physical security of a place needs to have a task and purpose. So here's an example. I have a store. I'm a shopkeeper, and I put a camera on the main door of my store. The camera over that door, the task, it should be capturing the face of anyone entering and leaving the store and also show what they might be carrying in or out. Its purpose is to detect and deter shoplifters. The task is really what that device does, not why it's doing it, what it does. And then the purpose is, why did I put it in there in the first place? Because if either one of those two things are not matched, then you're not going to get effective security. If I put a camera up and it's supposed to be capturing the face of anyone entering and leaving the store, I'm going to have to put that camera, if you think about it, pointing at the door from an angle. Because if I'm going to see faces as they're coming and going, that's pretty hard to do. If I put it over the door facing down when people come in, I'll see their face coming in, but I will see the back of their head going out. So if my task is to capture faces in and out and see what they're carrying, I know that I'll need to position that camera from a 45-degree angle, right from the side, outside probably, or inside the door, so I can see what people are carrying and I can see at least part of their face as they're coming and going, right? If the camera's over the door and its purpose is to detect and deter shoplifters, but I either, one, have no shoplifters because I sell major appliances, right? I sell stoves, refrigerators, dishwashers, right? I have no small things that get shoplifted. It's hard for you to put a refrigerator into your purse and sneak it out and not go detected, right? But if my purpose was to detect and deter shoplifters, and I change my store from, selling small items, a jewelry store, and I decide, no, I'm going to go into appliances, I no longer need the camera. The purpose isn't there anymore. I may want to refocus that purpose. I might want to say, The purpose now is to detect if anybody breaks in at night, right? Because they may come in at night to steal major appliances. They have a great resale value. Hard to steal, but great resale value, right? So you have to make sure you have a task and a purpose for anything you do in physical security. Everything you put in, if you can list the task and the purpose clearly, then it's a good idea to put it in place. By writing out the task and purpose, it really answered two questions. The task told us what? Told us how to position the camera, right? What we want to do, right? We want to detect people coming in and out and see their faces, what they're carrying. It answered the what. What is this here for, right? What are we going to do with it? The purpose tells us why. It shows us the value in that installation. Why did we put it up there? Because we want to catch shoplifters. What did we do? We put it in so that we could see faces and parcels being carried. If you do your task and purpose for every element in your plan, you can better defend your decisions. This will become valuable in court cases. This will become valuable if indeed someone does steal something and you are questioned by your boss and your boss's boss, how the heck did this happen? You can go back and say, these are the things I did, and these are the valid reasons I did them. And in fact, when you write out a physical security plan at some point in your career, using task and purpose as your values, when you write those out, will give you a plan that is very easily defended by you. Task and purpose can be used for just about anything in the world. Here we have a picture of a fireplace. You've all seen a fireplace, I'm assuming. What's its task and its purpose? In my opinion, the task of the fireplace is to hold the fire, safely hold a fire, indoors. Right? Can you imagine if you built this fire on that hardwood floor? You'd have a disaster on your hands, right? You'd destroy the floor. You'd probably, the house would go ablaze, and you'd be in trouble. The task of the fireplace is to safely contain an indoor fire. The purpose of the fireplace might be twofold: to create valuable heat, to warm people inside, and for an ambiance because you want to, you might like to look at a pretty fire. I probably burn more wood in my own fireplaces for ambiance than I do for heat. I have 3 fireplaces, and I a fire going in one of them probably every day in the wintertime. And I don't use it to heat the house. It would be very inefficient, but it looks nice. The task is to contain the fire, right? Safely contain the fire indoors. The purpose is for heat and for ambiance. Pretty simple stuff. Now let's apply that to a physical security barrier in task and purpose. This is the exterior of the Civic Auditorium in Nottingham, England. And as you can see, there are some planters there that actually have Christmas trees in them. They use those trees and they decorate them for Christmas, and it looks quite nice. The planters themselves are made of stainless steel, 1/4 inch thick, and underneath that 1/4 inch is a shell of concrete. So what is the task? Well, the task is to line the sidewalk for safety purposes from parking areas to the entry area of the Civic Auditorium. And you really can't see it, but if you were off in here, you'd see the same thing on the other side over here. Okay? So the task is to line the sidewalk for safety purposes and for visual appeal, right? Christmas trees, very nice looking. The purpose is to protect the pedestrians that walk along this area to the right, the lower right corner here, from vehicular traffic, because this is a roadway. People go through and drop people off and spin back out. And you can imagine in some cases, if there were a concert or something at this particular venue, it would be, quite busy, right? So the task is to line the walkway, right, for safety. The purpose is to protect pedestrians who walk over here. So we have a task and a purpose. We're using a barrier. Right? These are barriers for sure. You hit one of these with your average vehicle, and it's not going anywhere, and you're going backwards, right? First you're going forwards real fast, then you're next going backwards real fast, because this is not going to move. These things probably weigh somewhere around 2,000 pounds apiece, not counting the dirt inside of them, which is probably another 400 or 500 pounds. You hit a anchored object of that weight, and these are anchored, by the way, to rebar underneath this walkway. I mean, they're not going anywhere. So there's a barrier and there's a task and purpose. So let's jump into barriers. And a lot of people think of barriers when they think about physical security and protection of a piece of property. They only think fences. And in fact, a fence can be your worst nightmare, and we'll talk a little bit about it because people seem to think that if you've got a fence, then you're pretty much protected, and we know that it's not true. But barriers aren't just fences; they can be rocks and boulders, trees, serpentine roadways. If you think about trying to drive into a building, and you've got a straightaway coming off the highway, and you can drive for a quarter mile, you can get up to 100 miles an hour perhaps, and launch your vehicle into the building. If that roadway is all twists and turns around trees and rocks and things, it'll look prettier, and you'll never get up the speed you need to do any real damage. Planters, bollards, and we'll talk about bollards a little bit. Moats. People don't understand that you could use a moat. You can have a pretty pond in front of a building, and no one is going to make a vehicle attack. No one is going to try to approach really your building by going through the water and coming through the pond, right? Swim across the pond and come up on the other side of the building when you can walk on the roadway to get to it. But if you have your roadway full of detection devices, motion sensors, cameras, those things, then your moat, your lake, is going to protect you. Anything that gets in the adversary's way and delays their advance is a barrier. Now, the crime prevention through environmental design principles are the best thing you can do when putting in barriers, because you help design the outside of a new facility or redesign your landscape. And you're preventing crime through those environmental designs. And you can normally get a landscape designer. When you tell them what your purpose is, they will come back with some very nice ways for it to look, just like the Christmas trees, right? The security and safety people said, we've got to protect pedestrians along this walkway, that this roadway that's going to be very busy when we've got a concert or a sports event going on. We've got to protect the pedestrians. The landscape designer said, well, how about planters with Christmas trees? And you can plant them at Christmas, right? They are your best friends in that because they love designing around things like this. Anything of sufficient size, weight, or composition can be a good barrier. Fence, if it's tall enough, is a good barrier. The planters that are 2,000, 3,000 pounds apiece, very good barrier, right? Depending what you want to bar. But the barrier should really match the thing you wish to bar. So if you want to bar a vehicle, a fence is not the way to do that. We've all seen the thriller, not thriller, but the action movies where the car goes barreling through the fence, right? They got a truck and they just right on through. A fence isn't going to be an effective barrier. You have to understand that whatever you're trying to stop, that's the quality of barrier that you must use. There are lots of examples of things that you use for barrier, and really, even furniture placement in some cases can act as a barrier so that you can slow somebody's advance down within a room, right? Think about that. If you have a lobby and you have a security guard on the other side of the lobby, you don't want someone to be able to rush right up to them. You can put some sofas and chairs between them so the person at least has to slow down and walk around, buying you more time to understand what that person's purpose is. So a barrier can be anything. For exterior barriers in a building, fences and gating are generally used. Bollards, and if you don't know what a bollard is, I'm sure you do, but we're going to look at a couple different types. Masonry walls, right? Decorative walls around something, even if it's a knee wall. And a knee wall is just that. It's usually a masonry wall, stone, concrete block, something like that. It comes up about knee height, and then on top of that knee wall, you generally have a fence, but not always. But it's going to stop a vehicle. It's going to direct people around through an entrance. People don't normally climb up a wall that's 2-3 feet to jump across to take a shortcut. They would normally walk around it, right? So it's a barrier. Ornamental boulders, flower planters, as we've seen a couple of times. I used artwork at one facility. They were these big, ugly, round, I don't know, they look like a marble, right, made of granite, and they were, 3-4 feet tall. At Slippery Rock, I believe, over by the library, you will see some boulders that line a walkway. I don't know whether that was designed to protect people on the walkway or the library building itself, but they certainly work. If you were to hit those, if you were to try to breach those with especially a vehicle, you'd do some damage. And then I say holly hedges of any kind. People don't climb through hedges, right? A tight hedge, a planted hedge, is something that you'd normally go around. If you try to get through it, they're full of the growth underneath those things just doesn't allow access. They're as good as any wall. And holly hedges are one of my favorites, and I'll show you why. But a barrier is made to delay. It can often deter people, and you'll see some examples of how that can happen. But anything that delays the adversary is a barrier. So let's start with fences, because they're the most common thing used as a barrier in physical security. They are used to delay, but they really don't delay for long. So, the standard fence that you see around a factory, and if you drive around, and you will drive around a little bit or walk around in the next week because it's part of your assignment, if you're able to do so, you will see a lot of 6-foot chain link fences with a 3-strand barbed wire top guard. It's usually cocked back toward the street, right, toward the outside of the facility at a 45-degree angle. And that 3-strand barbed wire is 12-gauge steel wire. Has a 4 barb on it. So standard. I mean, it's used almost in every factory setting you can think of for a chain link fence with a rig. And it has a delay factor, according to the United States Army, of 12 seconds. That is how long it takes an adversary to climb that, carefully get over that 45 rig, because it only sticks out 1 foot. It's a deterrent, it's a barrier, but it's not a long-term delay barrier. 12 seconds. The beauty of a fence is that it tells you when somebody has intent. It is a property line, right? So if I put up a fence around my house, and it's a 4-foot fence, and I put the keep out signs, and I find somebody on the other side of that fence, it's very unlikely that they just wandered over the fence, right? I know that they climbed a fence or opened the gate and came in if the gate was open, but they knew they weren't supposed to be there, but they are. So there's a delay factor, and there's a deterrent factor, but it doesn't deny anyone, right? But it tells you when they're basically telling you, I'm on the side of the fence where I'm not supposed to be. They know they're doing something wrong. The whole idea of, I can't understand how I got here doesn't fly. Now, fences can be ugly. And if you are a professional business, you most likely will want to have a professional looking fence. It's normally called estate fencing. And you see it, and it does come with very, nice arrows on the top that look very fancy and are really sharp. Or it has curved sections that stick out, so it's hard to climb. But a fence is a fence, and it can be ugly. And in some jurisdictions, you will find that cities will not allow you to put up an industrial fence. One of the first facilities I had the opportunity to protect was one in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ann Arbor, being a college town, has very strict limitations on fences. They want everything to look nice. They want to attract the students. And unless you have a facility that requires by law a fence, right, you're protecting something that there's a regulation that says you must, you're not getting a fence. So you have to start thinking about, okay, how do I better protect the skin of my building, right? But fences can be climbed. Now, there's a YouTube video referenced here. I had it referenced in the introduction to this week. I would appreciate if you go just take a quick look at that and understand that even in the most protected buildings in the world, fences don't have a long delay, and they aren't a really great perimeter device. They really are simply a delineation to tell you when someone's done something wrong. Go take a look at that video and let me know what you think. Now, planters as barriers, and by the way, I apologize for not embedding that video, but in order then to download them to YouTube, if I embed a YouTube video into a YouTube video, it sometimes gets a little wonky. And I thought it would be better if you just went to watch them. So I do apologize that I couldn't make it easier for you to watch those, but there's one more coming up, which I think you'll enjoy if you haven't seen it before, because I think it's kind of fun to watch. But I hope you took something away from that and saw that White House jumper. He was able to jump the fence at the White House, which has, I believe, a 2-foot knee wall and a 10-foot estate fence. And not to mention Secret Service, all over the place, right? Uniform Secret Service and plainclothes Secret Service all over the place. But he was still able to jump the fence because a fence is a fence. Now, planters as a barrier make great sense in front of professional buildings, especially in an urban environment, because they perform 2 functions, really. Number one, back to vehicles again. These particular planters you see here are made of granite. You hit them, they may crack, but so will you, okay? They're pretty strong. And again, once you put plants in these, and sometimes you'll see them with flowers that are low root plants, but a lot of times you'll see them, as you see here, with evergreens, because they're deeper rooted. They just make it stronger, right? If you've ever tried to if you pull a flower out of the ground, you can do it with one hand. If you've ever tried to pull a shrub like these out of the ground, you better have gloves and you better have some time and a shovel, because the roots just tangle with each other. It really makes the whole thing a bit stronger. You'll see in this one, and down between these are little, I think these are lights, actually. I really have never been able to tell what they are, what their purpose was, but I believe that they are lights, but they just add a little more, depending on how much space is between these. From this angle, you can't tell, but even if it's 2 or 3 feet, if these are in the way here, it would keep people from walking. People will come up, and rather than cut across here up against your building, if you're in an urban setting and there are planters, they will normally walk this way and then turn into the entrance where you want them to go. So planters do 2 things. They protect against vehicles, but they also direct pedestrian traffic in a way that people tend to walk around the planter in the direction, if you set them up correctly. If you had them over here, they won't normally cut between them, right? They will walk around and come this way. Later on, when we talk about camera placement, the more you can direct people toward one place, the better coverage you will have, and you'll be able to focus your cameras a little better that way. So that's one example of using planters as barriers, and you will see these all over the place. And I don't know if you ever thought about them as a security device, but that is exactly what they are. If not, you would just plant you just have cutouts in the ground. As you see, you can do that with concrete, and you'd put a tree there, which would still give you some barrier, but not nearly as much as these heavy dogs do. So here's an example of a wall covered with holly in this case. Ivy is also used on walls. You see these, a lot in Europe. They just fit more with the traditional architecture in Europe, but you'll see them in the Northeast U.S. as well. And you don't really think of them as a security device. You think about the wall as being a security device, right? Because it's a barrier for sure. Certainly not going to breach it with a vehicle. Certainly not going to try to crawl over the wall normally, especially this one looks to be about 8 feet high. Could be much shorter. And it will direct people, again, to the proper opening, which then you can cover well with cameras to get identification level and be able to see who's who. But there's one thing about this particular wall that I really liked, and that's what the covering is made of. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to climb a wall that's made of holly like this. It stays green year-round. It's very lush looking. It takes a little while to grow, but you will find even home security consultants will tell people this is what you plant under your windows at your house. It looks nice. It stays green. You can trim it and box it off. It can look very formal if you want it to. But I will tell you that when you start to climb over something like this, you better be ready for it, because it actually, yes, they're plants, they're leaves, they'll bend, but they don't all bend, and you are going to definitely feel it when you try to climb. So this is a combination. This one made of both a wall, right, for vehicular and to direct people around. And then the addition of the holly basically makes it harder and harder to climb. So you're really using 2 different types of barriers here. You're using vegetation and you're using a wall to deter. You're going to delay for sure, and in this case, you're going to deter. So you've added that second D in there. A very common barrier used in industry is a bollard, and a bollard is nothing more than a stanchion or a pipe or a blocker for particularly that purpose. Now here you have, that's a gas standpipe in the middle, that red thing. And if someone were to back into that with their pickup truck, everybody would have a very bad day, because it could cause a very nasty explosion. Around it are these bollards. These appear to be about 8-inch bollards. They're plastic on the top there. That's kind of a plastic sleeve that slides over. Inside of that is a steel hollow pipe, which is 8 inches around, okay, and usually about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch thick. And then inside that is concrete. And these are sunk in the ground, normally half the length. So if these are 5 feet tall, then they would be sunk at least 2.5 feet into the ground, just as you do with a standard fence post, right? You go half the length of the fence post into the ground. That's just the way things are done. That really doesn't have much of a security factor, other than the fact it makes it more sturdy. But that's how you sink a fence post, right? So these normally go the same way. And that steel goes, all the way down into the ground, is filled all the way down. And if you back into one of these, you will do damage to your vehicle before you do damage to that standpipe. I have had a personal vehicle that someone in my family was driving that backed into a bollard, and certainly the bollard gets the win They're pretty sturdy, even though they have plastic coatings on them. Don't think that they are plastic pipes when you see them. If you hit on one of those things, normally you'll hear the metal on the inside, and they're filled with concrete. That's what a bollard's for, but there are lots of different looking bollards that you'll see out and about. These are precast bollards. They're just that because they're cast from a combination of concrete and stone, normally small stones, right? So they've got kind of a nice look to them. Oftentimes you will see stainless steel bollards, and they have lights in them. So when you see those nice lights when you walk up to an office building, you see those lights out front. Oftentimes, they're on a little pole and they're about this same height. I would venture to say that those were chosen because they are anchored into the ground and they are filled, and they're dual purpose. They're the light and they're the bollard. Again, if you hit one of these things with a vehicle, you're going to know it, and you're not going to hit your intended target. And bollards are very popular, along with planters, especially in municipal buildings. Buildings that have a particular threat. Government buildings have a particular threat, as you Homeland Security majors know, right? You're striking the government when you strike a government building, at least in the minds of some terrorists. And so these are used a lot in government buildings, but you will see them as well in urban environments and in places where you're driving up to the front of a building. You will see these precast bollards and or stainless steel ones with lights in them used a lot in more upscale buildings. Then there's the pop-up bollard, which is kind of an interesting character. They also have pop-up ramps, which you can imagine just look the same. They operate the same, just look a little different. But the pop-up bollard comes out of the ground, and you will see it in places where you drive up to a guardhouse perhaps, and there is a bollard in the middle of the road, and once you are cleared, they lower the bollard. It just goes down, it just recesses into the ground, and you go through and it pops back up again. There are other bollards that are actually movable, and you can take them out. You put them in with a special tool, twist them in place and lock them in place so you have them when you need to, and then you can take them out individually if you need to get a big vehicle through for a delivery or something along that line. But pop-up bollards are generally used in high security areas. You'll see them at nuclear power plants. You'll see them any place where you need to stop primarily a vehicle at a high rate of speed. Now, I put another short video in here. I think this one's about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and the music is really dramatic. But so is the result when you see the pop-up bollard and see how it handles things. So when we talk, and please go watch that video, but when we talk about perimeter protection, when we talk about the delay factor, primarily you're going to see fences, you're going to see walls, you're going to see things like planters and bollards in more urban areas generally. But the main factor is that you're going to use these things to delay and protect. And when we do our design of our warehouse, you're going to do this design of the grounds. I gave a picture of it this week and put it into the course shell. But I'm going to make some modifications to it because later today, in fact, I'm going to post the preliminary risk and threat assessment for the building, and you'll see some of the things that we're going to do in there, and that may give you pause as to whether you use a fence or bollards or both or neither. So let's move away from barriers and talk a little bit about lighting. So lighting in commercial buildings of any type has multiple functions, and that can be your best friend as a security manager, because oftentimes trying to sell something purely as a security feature is a hard sell. But when something has multiple uses, then it's easier to sell. Now, lighting is a deterrence, right? Adversaries love the cover of darkness. If your building is well lit and the one next door is not well lit, and you both are warehouses storing similar, commercial goods, theirs will get hit and yours won't. I mean, it's that simple. Lighting provides proper detection, and adversaries hate bright lights. We all know that, right? That's just no secret. But they also provide a safe environment. There's less chance of accidents in a well-lit area. I mean, you're trying to do something in the dark, you stumble around in the dark, and you stub your toe. You stumble around in the light, you stub your toe. Well, you had an idiot moment. All right, it's kind of what it is. More lighting, less chance of accidents. Identification is a great one for lighting. So when you drive up to a building and you see the lights get brighter toward the main entrance. You almost know where to go at night in most buildings because you're following the lights. You're driving on a roadway and it's going to lead you somewhere, and then you park your car and then you're walking up a walkway, and there's probably several ways to walk, but you're walking up the one that's well lit. It's safer for you, right? And it's safer for everybody, really, but also it just kind of is a mental signpost of where you're going to go. So identification is a big factor in lighting and very helpful. Video support. Cameras need some form of light. Yes, we're going to talk about cameras with infrared on them, but cameras normally need some source of light. Even low light cameras use devices that concentrate the available light in most cases. So for video support, you need some. The thing that is great about lighting is that you can almost sell it in your sleep. Right? And when I say sell, I'm talking about going to people who are going to control your budget and saying, I think we need to increase the lights on the north end of the property. Why? Well, look, it's very dark out there from a security perspective. People can get out there at night and they're going to get hurt because they can't see where they're going in that parking lot out there. I can't see anything on the cameras because it's a little too dark. And maybe if we change the lights from one type to another, we put LEDs in there, they'd be brighter and we'd save some energy money. There's lots of sales techniques you can use to get better lighting. Pretty hard to say I need a taller fence, right? You have to stick to the security argument for a taller fence. With lighting, you have an engineering factor, you have an energy saving factor, you have a safety factor, all things that come into play. So lighting can be your best friend, it can be your easiest sell. And normally lighting is paid for by somebody else's budget other than security. So if you want to increase security somewhere, look at your lighting because there are so many ways that you can sell it. Let's take a look at some lighting types. So let's talk about a couple of different lighting types and what their good and their bad is. So fluorescent lights. We're all familiar with fluorescent lights. You know, the kind where you turn them on and you hear the ding, 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 and then they come on. They're a tube. You probably have them in the majority. Well, I won't say the majority of classrooms at SRU because I know that SRU is going to LED lighting, but they're very common in a commercial setting. They're bright. They're slow to start. They're not really good in cold weather. They tend to, the ballasts tend to blow in the colder weather. I would not suggest fluorescent lighting for security purposes in most instances, but it may be what you have to work with. Low pressure sodium, you can really identify low pressure sodium lights as you drive around at night in any commercial area. Look at the lights that are on the side of the building. They normally are like a sconce type light on the side of a building, and they almost always have a yellow kind of amber tint to them. You'll see them affixed to the side of a building. Normally they're affixed right to the building. There's no arm sticking out or anything. They're affixed right to the building. There's kind of a yellowish light. They're good in the fog, right? They actually help you look in the fog. But I will tell you that when you're looking at camera images, color camera images, and the lighting is low sodium, low pressure sodium, greens look like reds and reds look like greens. It really distorts the color of color cameras. Why do I say that? Well, let's say you have a parking deck. You have a parking garage on your property that you're protecting where you're just a security manager. Low pressure sodium lights in that environment where you're not going to really have the fog inside because you're kind of covered and protected a little bit aren't a great choice because if you're trying to identify somebody via camera, you're going to have color distortion. So I wouldn't opt for low pressure sodium there. But on the sides of buildings, they are a good general deterrent and they're really cheap. They're one of the cheapest light sources you can get. If you're designing a building, you'll see them on warehouses a lot. Mercury vapor, well, that's kind of the common, street light that you see, right? The pole-mounted single, you see it on a telephone pole in a parking lot at a small facility. It's that single light that hangs out on a gooseneck. It's usually a mercury vapor light. It's got a blue-white light. Fairly good for your cameras. Doesn't give you much use in fog. It tends to reflect back off the fog rather than cut it. But very common mercury vapor. Quartz lights are very bright. They use a lot of energy, and they've kind of gone out of favor to some extent. You won't see a lot of quartz lights. You'll read about them in the text, but they do use a high amount of energy, so they've kind of gone to the wayside. LED is what you're going to see on any new building. They're really great with new cameras. LED lights with old cameras, they weren't built for that. so they have a little trouble sometimes with seeing stuff in LED. But new cameras are made to work with LED lighting outside. And of course, it's extremely energy efficient, and the bulbs last forever. If you are lucky enough to become a security person, physical security person at a facility that is really committed to energy use and has LED, you are golden, because any new cameras and things you put up, and the lights aren't going to burn out every year or two, where you've got lights out. You got 3 of them out in the north parking lot and 2 in the south parking lot, and then you've got dark areas, and that creates a security problem. LEDs don't have that problem. They last for 10 or 20 years. They're just the greatest thing out there, in my opinion, from security lighting. So always opt for LED when you can. Just a word on metal halide lights. They were really pushed as the best thing for security, and for many years, people who were selling lights for high security areas were selling metal halide. Generally, you see them, they can be square or rectangular, about the size of a computer screen, mounted on a pole. They'll be very, very strong, white, bright light. I mean, the candle power on these things is tremendous. They use very little energy. You also may see them in big bays in factories, the lights that hang down that look like a bell, that hang down off a drop mount. You will see that most of those are metal halide lights. The problem with metal halide is there have been a number of explosions. They simply just blow. And they were used a lot in stadiums, right? Football, baseball stadiums for night play, because they just give you a tremendous amount of light at low energy. But if somebody recommends metal halide lights to you for security purposes, I would ask them to give you some indication of the safety on that light. There have been a number of lawsuits having to do with metal halide lights, and a lot of places have not replaced them because they haven't had the problem. It's kind of like, if you have a car that has a recall for an airbag, you don't get rid of all the cars. You hopefully get it fixed, but not everybody does, and sometimes you're okay. But I just wanted to mention to you that metal halide lights have a number of issues that, from a security manager's perspective, if somebody is putting those in for security purposes for you, because they do have a really strong light, I mean, they're bright and they use so low energy. I think that's gone away since the LED has become so popular, but just wanted to mention that a little bit. I think the book mentions metal halide lights, if I'm not mistaken, but be aware of those and always ask a question about safety. So some other considerations with lighting that you ask yourself if you're designing a building for physical security is, how much light are my neighbors going to give me? So if you are in a commercial area, in an industrial park where your neighbors are very close and they have really bright lights on their buildings, how much do you need to install? I mean, you have a limited budget, and so if you are getting ambient light from other things, then you use that to your advantage. You also have to consider the whole light distribution. So light is measured in foot candles, and it is indeed the amount of light created by a candle, a flame, right? Candle flame at 1 foot. And then there's a measurement for that, and you will measure light in how many foot candles you get from it. But light distribution, if you take a flashlight and put the front of the flashlight on your hand and start to pull it away, you'll notice at 2 inches, you'll have a really bright palm, but the ends of your fingers aren't all that well lit. Pull it back another 2 inches, and now you'll see the ends of your fingers are getting better lit, but the palm isn't as bright. And as you get farther away, the light distributes out, right? So you have to understand light distribution a little bit. You want to have the right distribution, the right array of lights across an area. Does your lighting cover your roadways and your pathways? From a security perspective, you definitely need to have that. If someone, says, okay, we're going to put lights out at the street, and then we have this driveway coming in for a half a mile, and then we'll start lights on the building, you have a security concern during that half mile. Even if you haven't seeded that, if you have seeded that, you still can't see anything. So does your lighting cover the roadways and pathways well? And then you also have to be careful on lighting from a security perspective. Don't overdo it. And I'll give you an example. I had a facility in Franklin, Ohio. You could see this facility from space, I'm convinced. They were using metal halides, and they were on really high poles, and there was a big grassy area behind this factory. I mean, it was about the size of maybe 3 football fields, and it was mowed, And the fence they had a fence and it went out around. The fence didn't have a lot of clear zones on it. There was stuff growing all over top of it, which was terrible. But it was just this big open flat field that they kept mowed. And they had it lit as if they were going to have the Super Bowl on this field. And it really attracted more than it detracted. In a couple of ways, there were complaints from the neighbors that there was too much light. We had neighbors that were, within 100 yards that their houses were lit up at night by these things, right? It didn't say a lot about us as an environmental neighbor using so much energy, and you really have to think about the reputation that your security gives, right? If your fence is out there and it's electric and it's got barbed wire on the top of it and razor wire on the top of it, and what you're protecting is an elementary school, I would venture to say the parents would reject that idea, right? So think about your lighting and all of your physical security protections on the outside of your building in a way that you want to make sure that it matches what your company wants to be seen as, because those are the most visible things to the neighborhood. So lighting can do that for you. If you overdo your lighting, it can come back to haunt you as much as underdoing it. And finally, let's talk about emergency call stations as a physical security feature, right? Emergency call stations, and here's a picture of one for you. Okay, you've probably seen them on campus, you see them out in the community, you see them all over the place, right? And it's, go push the button in case there's an emergency. They do a couple of things, quite frankly. There's an intercom, right? And it normally goes to 911 station or to a security station, depending on what the use is. When you hit it, a light comes on, so anybody responding knows exactly where they need to go. Normally, when the button is hit, and sometimes all the time, there is a camera running on those. So you can see why the person may be in trouble. You may be able to run up and hit the button, and that's all you can do, right? I mean, if you were in a serious accident, you're dialing 911 on your cell phone, maybe you can dial 911 when they say 911, can I help you? You can't talk, right? The camera does the exact same thing. If you hit the button and then you're in trouble and you can't say anything, it's all being recorded. They definitely provide a light source, and in many cases, these call boxes, if they're not the individual stands like the one I showed you, they actually get mounted onto a light pole. And that's a really great way to do it. There's some really good brands that do that. Code Blue being one, Federal being one. If you mount them to a light post, you use the power from the light post. You use a step-down transformer, and it changes the power so that you can use both the light and this emergency unit on a light pole. And then there's signage to identify the purpose. One of the reasons that this increases your physical security is it is a deterrent, because it tells you that you take your security seriously. The security of people on your grounds is taken seriously because you have installed these. Very popular with employees. They tend to overuse them and hit the button when they have a flat tire, right? But they are very popular. And I would encourage you to consider those when you set up physical security, because, again, they are one of those deterrent things. The fence or the wall may be a deterrent in that people see it and they say, okay, I'm not supposed to be on the other side of it. This indeed is also a deterrent, especially to, as you can imagine, crime in parking lots, which can include robberies, rapes, and other violent crimes. If there's a place to run, then oftentimes someone will pick another target. But one of the big problems with these emergency stations is that when people install them, they do it wrong. And I don't mean from an electronic standpoint. When you decide you're going to put emergency stands in outside your facility, you need to make sure they are equal distance apart. I should not have to run 100 yards to get to one in one parking lot and only 50 yards to get to one in the next. They should be equal distance apart. When you lay out a plan for these things, you lay out a grid over top of the picture of your facility, and you just determine what the proper distance is going to be. There is no set formula for the proper distance, although I would say that once you get beyond 50 yards, you're pretty much making it impossible for somebody to run for help. But make sure they are equal distance apart. So I don't have to run a different distance to get to one, depending on what parking lot I choose to park in. I have seen these put in where they're only put in executive parking areas. You can put them only in areas that are deemed for night parking. If you have signage that says all vehicles should be parked in the the front lot at night, and you block off your others, or at least have signage not to be used at night, and then you put only emergency call stations in there for nighttime use, which is generally when you want to be able to use them, that's okay. But I've seen them put only in the executive lots. First off, it tells the rest of your employee population that you don't care about them, which is not the case, hopefully, and certainly a bad message. But it also then is just ripe for a lawsuit. If something were to happen to someone and you put in protections for some people and not for others, you could run into a problem. Make sure they look the same as far as signage. Either you're going to use them to call security or you're going to use them for emergency only. Don't have some that say emergency and others that say security call box on them. Make sure the signage is the same and just determine what it's going to be, right? I have some facilities that use these, and if you have a flat tire and you need help, you can push the button. It's not a problem. Others are emergency use only. They only want you to push it when there's an emergency because their procedure says call the police, initiate a response. You should always place them as best you can to have people run toward the safe area, not away. So when we talk about a parking lot again, right? So let's imagine that this slide you're looking at, your screen is the parking lot, right? And if you put them in the upper corners, okay, and then a few in the middle, there's a problem. Because if I'm here, right, the front of my facility is at the top of the screen, right? That's the main door. That's where security sits, right in there. And I'm parked way at the bottom of the screen here, right around in the middle section. And I have a problem. Someone is, coming toward me in the parking lot, and I feel threatened, and I'm going to run to push a button. I want you running toward security. I don't want you running away, right? Because if you don't make it, you're even farther from me, usually in a darker area. Once you get outside the parking lot, the lighting changes a little bit. We know that because the lights are positioned in the lot generally. So we want to make sure people run toward a safe area, not away when we put our grid out. So try to stay away from the fringes of a parking lot and have people, if they have a problem on the fringe where they may be parked, that need to run toward the center and then in that array where it's equal distance apart. And then integrate cameras on a building with the call box. And this is a little bit, we haven't really gotten to cameras yet, but you can make it so very easily that when you push the button on that emergency call station, it turns the camera on the building and turns it around and points it toward that area. As many cameras as you can get from as many angles as you can get. That automatically, when you push the button, within milliseconds, everything turns on and spins around to point toward that area from different angles so that you can see what's going on. Always integrate any available cameras with the camera on the call box so that you have multiple views of a potential emergency situation. So lots and lots of stuff about barriers and lighting this week. Some of it, I hope that you were able to understand that I was doing it from personal experience on a lot of this stuff and why they fail, because I don't want you to make the same mistakes. But lots of information kind of boiled into this lecture. Just to understand the basics, make sure you do the reading. You viewed the lecture, you're done there. There's a discussion this week, and it's going to entail you going out and taking photos, okay? And you'll take photos of different barriers and different security features on the exteriors of buildings or on the grounds of buildings. And you'll explain why you think they may have been put there. That may not have been the reason. You don't know the task and purpose. You can only guess at it, right? But I think from looking at it, you'll be able to tell me what the task and purpose of the things you're taking the pictures are, especially some of the more common ones like bollards and planters and fences. I want you to go out if you can safely to take these pictures. Please don't pull pictures off the internet. But you may already have pictures on your phone. I mean, if you're like me, you've got thousands of pictures on your phone. You probably have some pictures of stuff anyway where you can look at it and say, hey, that's a kind of a cool security feature. I didn't see it that way. You can use that. But then you will critique others' work and on their task and purpose and the things that they mentioned in their discussion. I want you to look around at the placement of those things, though, and say, did they do it right? As you're going around, if you see an emergency call box, is there an array? Does it look like you can, they're equal distance apart? Did they put them way out on the fringe where you have to run away from the building rather than toward it if you run into an emergency? Look around at some of these things and start to become a critic of physical security on barriers. Look and see if you think people did things right so that you can understand when it's your turn to do it, how you're going to do it. with that, I went a little bit long this week, so you have a great week. If you have questions, if there is a reason why you cannot get out to take pictures because of quarantines or some other issue that I just did not think of, please let me know that, and I will come up with an alternate that is as challenging. So, it doesn't just, I'm not just keeping you from going out in the cold. You're going to do the work. But I really would like you to go out into the community where you are, where you live, as you're going out for other purposes. Don't make special trips. If you're going out to run to Sheets to get a cup of coffee, well then take your phone with you as you do, and if you see something along the way, stop and take a picture of it. It'll be great for the assignment. So then there's tons of these things out there. You're not going to run out of things to take pictures of. With that, have a great week, and I hope to hear from you. If you have any problems or questions, please let me know.